So welcome back to Unapologetically, not just free, but free indeed. I am your host, Dr. Angeline Dean. And today I am going to finish, as I stated at the end of part 1, part 2 of my dissertation defense. I'm now going to move into theoretical frameworks. And so because there is not everyone that is in education or academia who will be watching this, you will see how what I'm talking about is I'm not just talking about this in academia, but I am talking about this type of behavior, this type of white supremacy delusion, this type of white injected oppression throughout all systems. And how can it not be when we look at how America was framed, how America is framed and how it was formed, And so when we also begin to think about how the afterlife of enslavement that we are now dealing with, and I have to think Saidiya Hartman, that's what she talks about, Dr. Hartman, the afterlife of enslavement. And so how this lives in systems. Am I trying to paint this as all black people are victims or from a victimhood mentality? Absolutely not. However, again, when we look at the forming of these systems, who is the one that suffers the most? And we gotta look at those who were enslaved. And so I'm going to go right into the first slide and talk about how I used what theoretical frameworks I used in my work. So in my work, I used what is known as whiteness as property, from Dr. Harris, a legal term, and where James Baldwin says something along the lines of white men invented black men in order to give white men identity. And so I laugh when I hear that statement or that phrase. Again, you can read a lot of this for yourself of what some of the tenets are or some of the beliefs under whiteness of property, what comes under that, this whole dominance. And you will read, if you read Dr. Cheryl Harris, his work, you will see that white people had the rights of disposition, the rights to use our bodies for enjoyment, the reputation and status as property legally, and the absolute right to exclude. I also use critical race theory. Absolutely. And so I thank Dr. Crenshaw for, again, another term that originated under legal studies. But in academia, I first learned about critical race theory from Dr. Gloria Latson Billings and Dr. William Tate's article. However, once I was reading critical race theory, the one thing that really jumped out for me is when the article stated how we should have been freed on the grounds of property versus humanity. And I hope you see where that links in with whiteness as property. I also use Anti-Blackness by Dr. Dumas, where basically it's a hatred of black bodies, right? Simply because we're melanated, we're black, considered black. And so also Anti-Blackness, Zeus Leonardo speaks in some of his work, and he talks about that those people who we have to be careful of, also those people who say that they are tolerant people and lovers of diversity and believers in justice, because a lot of times they too are anti-black. And all you have to do is look at what's going on around reparations, right? We're giving billions of dollars plus benefits to many coming in from other countries. But yet we're still having conversations around whether or not to say the word reparations. Are you serious? So I think there's some anti-blackness going on there. I also use something called bodies out of place theory. Dr. Barbara Combs, love this theory. And so in this theory, she speaks about this concept that positions the body as corporeal and an issue and a space to which opposition, and there's opposition and this non-acceptance. It's also both relegated as tangible property, right? And it's dehumanizing, objectifying. There's this lynching going on. There's this raping of the body, raping of the mind, raping of us physiologically. And we are relegated to space and place. And so when we look at today, the policing of Black body and how that continues and how it is achieved through a cognitive, discursive, and the microdynamics of power. And so basically there's this maintenance of oppression. And so I use two of her tenets that talks about how racism operates on a macro and micro level, yet begins on a micro level. And then again, these positions of relations, and I'm going to talk about that when you see the model. And so when we look at the university as a plantation through anti-Blackness, we look at it through their policy, through their history, through the hidden curriculum agenda, right? Curriculum violence. We look at it through lack of resources. You can read the rest. This whole commodification and tokenism, which is going to be one of our conversations, because I am hearing from some that, well, there's nothing that we can do, Angeline, because, we as leaders, even though we're operating under what I say, this is not leadership, but you are ship leaders. And so I am told from several around the dean's level that this is what we have to do in order to survive. So then it makes me now pose the question, do Blacks in these positions really have power? That's going to be a conversation, and I want to do some research around that. So bodies out of place at the university. So it's this in place and out of place is not only via geography, right? Like how we look in our communities. Oh, now I need this space, so let me gentrify and push the people out. But in academia, it also deals with behavior, right? Know your place, know your space. You'll see what I'm talking about with that too. Bodies out of place had to be a part of my theoretical framing because I feel like that was the glue that glued that brought everything together. And bodies out of place, Dr. Combs says that strategically written policies, laws, and statutes relative to melanated bodies is the serving interest of universities. And this is somewhat different when you begin to read critical race theory. This is where they are a little bit different, but basically agree on everything else. So now we're going to the model. My oppression, plantation, paradigm model, where I speak about I was never down with OPP. So I use the work of Durant and Notaris. And I used this first slide here and developed this first slide using the 9 principles or the 9 elements of what is needed and necessary to define a plantation structure and a plantation atmosphere. So when you begin to read and really see what these slides are talking about and what these slides are, the elements mean, right? So we look at knowledge. There's this common belief espoused as truth, right? So I'm gonna show that in a minute, how that's the epistemology of what is happening on the academic plantation. Sentiment, the views and feelings toward two people. This power, right? To ability to control behaviors or attitude, that space or place. Facility and how our bodies are used within the system, labor, resources. There's a ranking, right? A hierarchy. And then there's sanctions. So this is what I'm talking about when I talked about space and place, the theoretical framing and the relations. So you are rewarded when you do what the quote master monster says to do. But when you're the buck, you're going to be punished. And so this is the first slide. And I do this as like that of a solar system. That was intentional because that is what I am saying is hovering over these United States of America. And the president and everybody else can say no, but we see it. So the politics at the helm. So this was the past structure on my left. This was the past structure of the plantation and its players. The white planter was the owner of that space. The overseer was generally a white person who looked over the enslaved people, watched over us to make sure that they were literally, if you go to Civics in Black and White and he listened to the conversation on emancipation or watch the movie with Will Smith, you will also see that enslaved people were literally worked to death. And so this was the overseer. This was his responsibility to make sure that they were getting the most for their money. However, in researching, I did find out, according to Durant and Notaris, that there were times where the overseer was an enslaved Black person and the head driver could also be an enslaved Black person. So it is no wonder why we see what we see in these systems of us doing it to us. It happened. It was placed in us from the plantation. And you will see if you don't know how that was predatory and how that was directional and how that was intentional. And so again, just like the plantation, you had the house slave and you had the field slave. Same thing on my right side. You have the same thing here. I'm going to add one more space here. I don't know what I want to call the white planter on this side, but the colonizer basically was the same as that of the overseer. Sharecroppers, in my story, I talk about how also sharecropping is going on here and how I felt like these Black people were coming at me so hard that it was almost like they were happy to be enslaved. That was scary. And so same thing, the house slave, the field slave. And again, when you're doing what you're called and told to do in these spaces, you get rewarded. My first year experience. So week 1, orientation, day 2, day 3. We are told, welcome to aKKKademia. We own you. So it took me a minute, like, did I really just hear this biracial woman who operated as whiteness when she wanted to have her privilege and elitism and power to the people when she needed to be Black? And so myself and the racialized as white woman were the only ones who were like, no, you don't own us. Let's get this clear day 1, week 1. But that goes back to that epistemological belief that I talked about a couple slides back. So in another class, a professor asked us, so, how are you feeling? Maybe a month in, how are you feeling? And when it came to me, I said, I feel like I'm being hazed. And he kind of chuckled, ha, 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 you are. And I thought to myself, this is really interesting. And maybe it wasn't a month in, it might have been a little bit longer. But I can tell you by the end of the first semester, I was already talking about the plantation year 1. And so, if I was being hazed and I was a part of a sorority and being hazed or doing the hazing, that would be considered a crime. But yet we're doing it here. There was another time I was called oppositional, and I loved it because I was. And that term was given to me by a racialized as white counselor. Oppositional. And when you read, if you ever read the dissertation, and let me just pause right here, because I've had people say, where can I read it? I have an embargo on my dissertation because I am looking for the right publisher to take my work and allow me to tell my story, not just the way I want to tell it, but also we need to talk about enslavement around publishing in academia as well. When I heard that people were only receiving 2% or 3% of the money from their hard work, and I remember in class saying to this former professor, that's enslavement. And why are these people asking me to give up my copyright in order to publish? Like, can you explain this to me as a new student? I'm a little confused. But I don't think I'm the one that was confused. And so words, oppositional, I was called. Again, I was the angry Black woman. I was told, oh my God, Angeline, it's your tone. Well, if I said it that way, I meant it that way. But nobody ever stopped to look at their tones or what they were doing. I was also called aggressive, not assertive like many of them, but I was aggressive. So then after a while, again, in that first semester, professors started telling my colleagues, don't get involved with her. Leave her alone. With the end goal being to this whole conquer and divide tactic, right? Thank God that my people were who my people were in my in my cohort, most of them anyway. And so they would come back and tell me. And so they recognized the whole conquer and divide as well. In another space with professors, I was told, Angeline, I think you and your cohort have the wrong idea about why we brought you here. We brought you here to teach you how to dismantle the outside. Now, if you look again in that atmospheric 9 element slide, you will see norms and sanctions. This is what this operates under. But what she was really saying was bodies out of place, critical race, anti-Blackness, and whiteness is property. All of those those theoretical frameworks were coming to play, because what she was really saying when she said, we brought you here to teach you how to dismantle the outside, that was that respectability, identity, politics in play. What she was saying was, nigga, know your place and stay in your place. You little light-skinned girl, you better understand that you are now in the house. See, I wasn't one of those enslaved people that said, oh, we sick, massa, when we both ain't sick, as Malcolm X talks about. So then as I began to talk about and ask questions and talk about how I felt like I was on this plantation, every time, all the other students can talk about where they thought their work was going. But when I would begin to talk about the plantation, it would be this silence. And so the silence to me was so silent that it was noisy. And so I began to talk about and use this term called noisy silence. And so it was done to make me feel invisible, no voice, no support. And again, the facilitation of the plantation was in play. This is actually a logo for a for-profit company. And this is where I talk about systemic interconnectionality, where we're profiting off of the backs of Blacks and impoverished bodies. You will see all of the systems. They look like puzzle pieces because they are all interconnected. And you will see, hopefully again, how all of these theoretical frameworks come into play. So as I'm talking about education, we can talk about something that just happened in sports, right? We can look at it from that. We can look at how this hockey player recently a couple days ago refused to wear the shirt where it had and supported the LGBTQ community. And he said, I'm not going to do that. It's against my religion. It's against who I am. The owner of that team gets on the mic and says, we respect his beliefs. End of conversation. I mean, other people were upset with him, but he stood on his grounds and he had a right to do so. Fast backwards, if that makes sense. But when we look at Kyrie Irving, he posted a link trying to look at his identity. Now, all of a sudden, what he did offended somebody. You wanted me to pay him to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, apologize, take a training course, all these things that you wanted him to do. You never came really after Amazon. And if you did, Amazon's still selling the tape. But we look at what is the difference between their beliefs and their belief systems. And I don't only speak about it from the aspect of white supremacy delusion that's not really acting delusional, right, against our bodies, but look at all of those who look like me that came after Kyrie and did not stand with Kyrie to be able to have his own belief. If we take it even further, and some may not like what I say, and I'm okay with that. Because when I looked at all these things that the ADL was asking, and how they felt offended, and guess what? If that's how they felt, that's how they felt. They felt like it was an attack on them. And so I just got back from Germany, and I was asking when I was over there, where can I go to learn about all the Black Germans that were killed in the Holocaust? Because I don't hear that as American history. I don't hear all of the those who were considered disabled that were killed in the Holocaust. I don't hear their stories. I don't hear how part of the ADL was put together because a Jewish man, raped a white woman and accused the Black man, because he thought it would be easier for the Black man to be lynched. And so when I'm talking about this stuff, and when I'm talking about anti-Blackness, my talking about anti-Blackness and loving Black people the way that I do unapologetically does not make me anti-white. I'm talking about systems. And that's why it was important for me to put this slide in here so that you can see the connections. You can see how the word police, drop the E and add a Y, how our policies still police Black bodies. You can see that there's a structural politics of the plantation that is still going on today. Don't email me with any of your hate mail or whatever. You say what you say, you believe what you believe, I do the same. I use Black Girl Autoethnography. Shout outs to Dr. Robin Borloin. Black Girl, all one word. Because oftentimes, unfortunately, when people see me, they don't see me as Angeline. They don't see me as a woman. They don't see me as a female. They see me as a Black woman, a Black female, a Black girl. And so all this became one word, Black Girl Autoethnography. And so I used this because it freed me in a space that allowed me to talk about the pains, the stains, and the chains that we still see that are going on in this United States. And so it freed me in a space to be able to to have my own home space, not in the masses' house, but my own home space. And so that home on the outside, loving myself, and that home on the inside, loving myself. And so if you look at this slide, it says when Black women engage in self-love, it is a revolutionary act. And so you see the picture, you see the adjectives to describe what I consider us as Black women. And then I saw this little phrase that says, what occurs when the sun and the earth make love, we all become one. And so when I become one with myself, one with my creator, one. And so this was so important for me to use. I also used autoethnography as well as Black Girl Autoethnography because it was a method and a text. It was epistemological and ontological, meaning it was a belief and what I espouse to understand my truth. It is cultural, historical, and it is political, because every time we wake up, people don't have to believe it or not, but when we wake up, Black bodies are political. For me, again, it was a form of emancipation and freedom, and it allowed me this fluidity between myself and these conceptual frameworks and other frameworks that I was using, and the fluidity to go in between myself and the model. Arts-based methods. I use vignettes. I use poetic inquiry. Again, you can see why, you can read why I did each and every one of these. It was a form of social justice, a cultural expression that relegated, again, me to home. It was intentional historically. It gave me this interconnected postcard experience, right? It was this I was both I and the witness of what was happening to me. I was not inseparable. There was an interweaving that was happening. So I'm going to do this a little bit out of order. Normally this would be in chapter 5, but here are my research questions. During my time in the doctoral program, how did I interpret Blackness operating as white injected oppression? What are the racialized and colonized experiences I encountered while in a program that proposed access, success, equity, and justice? How do I explain my experiences? What role did power and policies and structures playing my needing to be resilient? And in what ways did I activate any forms of resilience and community? I also talk about not just resilience, because I hear that all the time. Oh, our children, they're so resilient. No, they are forcibly resilient. There's a forced resilience in order to survive and thrive. And we don't talk about that part, because then it would force us to look at history. So, slide. So in my chapter 4, real quick, I just put this in here just so that you see what the title of each of my epochs were. His House. I'm not going to really go into that one for the sake of time, but His House was another poem that I wrote. And not only am I looking to publish my work, but I will be doing a small book of poetry, because that is what kept me sane a lot of times as well. And so as we're in chapter 4, I'm going to go over a little bit of the epochs, that just a couple. But I started out, and I had an opportunity this past summer to see Dr. Eddie Glaude again in Chicago, where I thanked him again. And so Dr. Eddie Glaude so graciously worked with me and some others around some city work and just building understanding. And so when I told him that I was going into a program for a PhD program started by a Black woman who said she was doing this for other Black women, and the very first thing that he turned and said to me, he said, Angeline, I will be there if you need some help. But what I want you to understand, and anybody that knows Dr. Eddie Glaude, his words are chosen with an intentionality. And so he said, Angeline, the first thing I want you to remember that all your skin folk ain't your kinfolk. Now, although I had already knew that, I thought, oh my God, why is Dr. Eddie Glaude saying this to me? And that stuck with me as just like the Cuba plantation experience, the Cuba Forest Black economic labor camp experience did as well. And so I wound up meeting a couple of students from a couple of cohorts after mine. And I was talking somewhere at the school, and they said, oh my God, you're the girl that the biracial professor talked about in class. And I just chuckled because I could only imagine. And he said, or they all said, it was interesting because she was laughing and talking about how you wrote a letter. I was blamed, although it was a few of us, but I already knew I would catch the brunt end, which was okay. And so she thought it was a joke that I had written about the plantation, and she thought it was a joke that I had called her the overseer. The saddest part is, A, that she thought it was a joke, but again, I told you who she was in her biracial space. And that's one of the saddest things, but the saddest part was I really didn't look at her as an overseer. I would never give her that much credence. For those of you know, in some of our communities, when our drug dealers have runners, right? Kingpins are up here, runners are down here. That's where I looked at her, as a runner. She would never get an overseer pass from me because I didn't think that highly of her to give her one. And so we wrote this letter. And so we sent the letter to the vice president of academic affairs. We sent the letter to the Title IX department. And when you read the dissertation, you'll see why we even sent it to Title IX, because it was a disgrace how we were treated even for that event. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to read a couple of things. And so it says, Dear Vice President of Academic Affairs, we are writing to express concern regarding several events which have taken place within the PhD program. We believe that it is vital to the success and well-being of students involved that this information is shared. We are requesting that the current practices and operations of the PhD program be examined. We are calling for an investigation into these allegations. The first event we would like to share was during a faculty retreat. The retreat was an attempt to improve the culture and environment within the program after hearing disturbing stories and incidents of several students. Here is where we question inequities, and we were told that this is just how the academy works. This is also where I was told, Angeline, you have the wrong perception of why you were brought here. So moving on, it says the attitudes that promote the assimilation of beliefs of a nonchalant happenstance of normalcy is completely unacceptable. In fact, we believe that Rowan could and should be the forerunner of institutions that foster and promote authentic change. However, these changes must begin with the professors themselves. This institution promotes culturally relevant stances, yet these stances are not used in how we are sometimes being treated. Too many professors promote cultural relevance from a theoretical construct, and I'm talking about racialized as white and Black professors and biracial and whomever else. Too many professors promote cultural relevance from a theoretical construct rather than a practical application. Even if this is truly how the academy operates, this is not what we were assured and promised when we were recruited. As students, we intend to commit our time, money, and attention in a space of acceptance, mutual respect, and inclusion. And again, we were in an access, success, equity, and inclusion space. We came with an expectation that Rowan leadership in the College of Education intended to govern themselves to the tenets of social justice and equity. As a community of students selected for this program, we believe that prior to creating external partnerships, the focus should be placed on building equity and inclusion within the university, and an emphasis should be placed on strengthening and fostering positive relations, community, and collaborative climates. Next, students attempted to administer a survey to legitimate and examine the concern of the cohorts. This was initiated by students to raise our voices since the program had not been evaluated. Mind you, we were in the second cohort term and already asking for evaluations of a program. Although identifiers were removed as much as possible, students still did not feel that they would be protected and did not feel comfortable answering due to fear of being recognized by their comments. This, coupled with the chance of experiencing retaliation, drove some students to either elect not to complete the survey or not to disclose their true positioning. Students were also concerned because the former executive director, the biracial woman, was a part of the review process, and that this would not lead to true anonymity. This, we feel, was highly unethical, and we have asked for an outside evaluator to begin this process, as this program has not had an outside evaluation. Third, in a Holmes meeting dated Tuesday, October 9, 2018, we had an opportunity to forge deeper into some of our concerns with the former Black Dean of Education. She had previously asked how we could move things forward and had spoken with PhD faculty about some of our concerns. Again, I want to pause right here because we as students were not allowed to speak before the council. We had to go to many of the racialized white professors, tell them our issues, and then they as if they were our fathers, would then take our concerns to the council. Now, we're in a program for access, success, equity, inclusion, and justice, but yet we cannot speak on behalf of ourselves. It was at this time it was shared with her that this space at Rowan is referred to one of a plantation. Although laughing, she admitted that she and her friends at other institutions have often spoke of the academy in the same framing. Again, this is where she told us to do whatever they tell us. This is where the professor told her that, you know, the next group of students are not going to take and operate upon this behavior because it is structural violence. Upon hearing her heart at the conclusion of this meeting, it is our sincere belief that she had no intention of supporting us in a manner we feel is necessary and progressive to the overall foundation of this program. Again, historically, this is cruel, harsh, and punitive in nature. It is so far removed from social justice, equity, and inclusion that if not handled immediately, these issues will eventually erupt. Moreover, several students presently find themselves in a state of eruption and have questioned their own mental health. Finally, our present executive director, who was hired by the former Black dean, has informed us, again, this is about the biracial woman, has informed us of the nature and conditions of her hiring, the same one who laughed and thought I was calling her the overseer. This executive director advised that she had control to run her program how she determined without anyone touching her quote unquote shit. Based on the full nature of the hiring, we understand why the leadership fosters a domineering atmosphere and why we feel that the former Black dean has not done much to address our concerns. I also want to say that in this publishing, I write the former Black overseer because this is one of the ways that I was told, well, we're not going to sign off if you write former Black dean. They wanted me to write something great about former Black leader, but I could not call her a leader when I seen her operate as a ship leader. So although the former Black dean reached out to a couple of students a week ago to address cares, these cares are not only felt by one or two students. This was just an example, a mere portion of what has been occurring. We want to reiterate that we were informed that, quote, we do not want to go outside of our department with any of these concerns as the higher ups did not want this program, end quote, and that we would be, quote, shooting ourselves in the foot, end quote, and, quote, we will be putting ourselves in a precarious position both at Rowan and within our PhD program. You read between those lines, end quote. We assert that this form of instruction is despotic and is one of intimidation and bullying. The multitude of degrees of inequities that have surfaced during our short duration in this program is what has shaped our cognitive dissonance and moved us to seek another form of action. We have often felt that the depth of what is occurring may not be truly understood by some and has caused us to delay reporting. Furthermore, we are passionate and motivated about our work and simply want to be provided a healthy space where peace, mutual respect, and a sense of cultural clarity are fostered. What made us really move forward in this letter is there was about to be a vote for a position, and we did not want the biracial woman to have this position. So that's why we concluded with a stay of vote for this position, and we let them know that we did not want her as the person, and she was not the right person to be in that position governing us. So pretty much immediately after we sent in that letter, we get, maybe several months later, right? We get this email. And in the email, they're talking about this new staff to the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which I feel like is the total opposite of anything at that space with dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in fact, I had actually called it at one time, definitely excluding inclusion. And so we were told that, some new additional members were coming to this department and how we should go congratulate and support these members. Okay, normally a lot of us did not have a problem with that until we saw that the member who was going over to this department was the woman we had just written about and asked for the stay. So I need you to understand how the tentacles work again. Let me move her from here for a minute over here so that we can downplay some of what is happening, and then go ask the same students that she's traumatized to congratulate her. And so went in about her leadership, the whole nine. Then as I was writing this dissertation, and one time I was just really in my place where I was meditating, in my place where I was praying, and I woke up and I felt like go back and find this email. And I did. And so when I found out that my former Black dean was now getting ready to be the vice president over this DEI department, I started looking and reading some of those emails. And I highlight the Title IX office. And I highlight that it said in the email, it said that she will begin planning for the new division immediately, but will remain as our dean. And I said, no wonder. She was overseeing the Title IX department when they got the letter. So, did we hear or did anybody come talk to us from the DEI department, from the Title IX department, from the Vice President of Academic Affairs? Absolutely, vehemently no, did not. Who now knew? The president. The liaison also knew through something else that happened. This now former dean, who was vice president of DEI, plenty of the faculty members knew, and others, and yet nothing was done. Silence again, right? Or as I'm told, Angeline, you don't know we were working on things behind the scenes. Yeah, and maybe you were, but guess what? You were still allowing things to happen, and there were things that I was told that, I had no control over, I can't do because of the union, I can't do. And if all of those things are true, then you continue making your $236,000 or 500 and something thousand like the president. You continue doing that, but leave us alone as students. So I'm not going to accept so much of this victimhood and victim mentality because basically you're telling me and you told me that you had no power and that you were a victim and are a victim yourself of basic tokenism. Again, listen, I can work with that, I can go with that, but leave us alone. Leave us, the students, alone. So another episode or epic that I talk about in my dissertation is when this biracial woman, she had given me this D, a D, y'all. I was like, what? How I get a D? I had an A from the last semester, and how I get a D? Now, she actually called me into the office of the new international Black dean. So we're sitting in this office. Again, my rights were violated because I was not given a copy of what was sent to the IRB board, Institutional Review Board. I was not giving that copy. And I was not given a copy of whatever was sent as to why I was coming before the international dean, before the director, before the assistant dean. And so I also shocked them because I didn't come by myself. Shout out again to Esther Baumgartner, Lisa Givens, Felicia, and all Crockett, and we all went together as one, something that normally does not happen, and they were shocked. And so when we were talking about why I received this D, and the biracial executive said, well, you did not follow protocol or you did not follow the rubric, something she came up with. But the bottom line was, when I had spoke about the plantation after going into doing equity reviews at a local high school, I was going to talk about the plant. I was like, oh my God, I'm seeing that I could do the plantation and see if it's here. And she said to me, absolutely, you will not do that. Da 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 da. She was like adamant, and I'm looking at her like the black mama look. Like, okay, lady, I'm paying for this. You need to bring it down. And what is the issue? And so when she began to tell me some of her struggles, some of her concerns in what could be considered a racist neighborhood still, I said, you know what? I understand your plight. I understand what you're doing. And I understand that this is for the greater good. And I said, okay, I won't talk about the plantation in these meetings at this school. Although there was a racialized as white guy in part of this cohort piece who used extensive language that was relegated. Nothing was done. That was okay. But I still said, okay. And the agreement was that when I wrote my final paper, I could speak about what actually happened. You will see in this slide, here is an email where she actually told me the final paper will reflect what actually happened. So I was already approved through the Institutional Review Board to do a mixed methods study. In doing my final paper, I then went to telling my story of what I saw, back to autoethnography. With autoethnography, I don't need approval from IRB. So that's why I switched over. Again, because she told me I could reflect what happened, and I needed to tell my story of what I saw there. So that's when I wound up in the principal's office, right? In the International Black Dean's office. And so I'm sitting there. Now, mind you, this grievance took 4 months. 4 months. Strategic. I can go into that in another time. We could talk about what happened. And so what happened intentionally, in my opinion, was it was this thought process that because she was the only one that taught this class, I would now fail the class, not be able to take my comps, have to wait a year before this came back around, this class, and so I would lose a year, not be able to take my comps, and have to sit back under her. This is what happened. And so when going there, telling my story, the whole 9 yards, this is what I was told. I was told that I must retake the course and complete she didn't even give me a D on the paper. She gave me a 0. She gave me a 0. And so it was under all of these terms. And again, when you heard me thank those women, Dr. Corey Brown, Dr. Amy Arcado, and Dr. Stephanie Abraham, they came together and made this happen, which then debunked her whole thought process. So what they did was I took a winter semester and in 7 to 10 days finished writing, I think it was like a 20-something page paper, had to pay $2,631.15 for 7 to 10 days of work. But it gets better. So then what happens? While my work was at the Institutional Review Board, the highest, I don't know what his title is, but he's over the IRB Review Board. And just to tell you and to talk a little bit about IRB, there are times when you could be kicked out of the program, kicked out of researching, all of these types of things. If when you go to the IRB, they find you guilty of a lot of things, right? So my work is sitting over there, and this is what he sends back. And even with him sending me this back, there was no refund of my money. There was no apology. There was nothing. And so he writes, he received and reviewed this report This seems like an adversarial relationship between the professor and the student. Again, I have no idea what she wrote about me, and again, my rights were violated. If the student is not following academic policy, then this must remain a college issue. IRB is not a punitive or decision-making body with respect to academic affairs dispute. This part is good. Court cases, meaning if she took me to court cases will lose the battle. Ethnography is not a human subjects research issue, and therefore caused data from the approved IRB is still allowed to be used. He then ends with saying, the professor who should be serving as the mentor has much responsibility to guide and support the students. End of conversation. So chapter 5, we're going to conclude this. I am not, again, going to go into how I answered each of the research questions. However, y'all will have the slides here so that you can read them for yourselves. Here I do talk about the forced resilience. So I want to talk about what it means to be fit, because this is really what a lot of this boils down to. So I was told that my work didn't fit. And I was asked, why would I stay in a space, again, if I didn't feel like my work didn't fit? Well, first of all, I really didn't even have this understanding of what fit meant according to research. I had an understanding of what fit meant according to a social justice activist community organizer. So when I was challenged by the same Black man who came for me later, and challenged in a good way about, doing a little bit more research, I found that fit, according to research, means that really what they're saying is in order to be fit, you have to be ready to assimilate, accommodate, to be congruent to what the structures and the institutions value. That it is this construct that highlights critical outcomes. It is really, overall, the social reproduction of whiteness as property. It's another form of furthering the indoctrination process that we get through pre-K through 12 in most cases. It's another form of breeding, animalistic, and it is a form of ethnocentric monoculturalism. Fit also in academia for professors determines a scholar's worth and value. So model research portfolio is competent in teaching, and to a degree, being fit means, again, according to research, conforming as a good colleague. What is a good colleague? Good colleagues are those who do not, quote, rock the boat, but make oneself, above all, presentable, hence uncontroversial and unpolitical. It's a socialization process that is not conducive to Black and brown bodies, research-driven. And it is, again, another form of indoctrination and cultural genocide. So here I just put those groupings from the 9 elements, and I put them together so that you can see them a little bit more cohesively. And then on this side, I talk about how this is done through privilege, politics, economics, psychologically, and you can read that as well. Next slide, I take the former slide and the 9 elements and lay it over my first year's experience to show how I came about with this thought process of academia as the plantation. So in my chapter 5, there's a letter to my peoples. There's a letter that I write to dear predominantly white institutions. And then there's a letter to the biracial, the Black, and the international Black, where I write a letter to them, and I relegate some of my experiences with them to COINTELPRO, again, to that of the FBI, and how our bodies blacks were hired to kill other blacks. So I basically relegate some of it to that. And then here, again, you can read for yourself my study's significance and why it is important. So what would happen now if I was back at the class, at giving my defense, it will be a time for questions and answers. And so what is going to happen is we're going to have some of these time for questions, conversations, and answers. I hope this satisfies what other professors have been calling me about. I hope this speaks to the systems from a culturally relevant stance. And again, I thank everybody who supported me. And I hope really that this not only helps graduate students, but undergraduate students as well. Again, you have been listening to Angeline Dean, Dr. Angeline Dean, excuse me, because now I'm on the other side. And thank you for tuning in to Unapologetically, not just free, but free indeed.